All right, so this is a podcast. It's called At Your Expense. I'm Trevor. There's Kat over there. And you can find us anywhere you listen to podcasts, on any of the platforms, Apple, Google Podcasts, Spotify, whatever the fuck you use, we're there. Go to our anchor at anchor.fm/ at your expense pod. Look us up on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube. We also have a link tree with links to any relevant actions, petitions, or events. And in our audio and video descriptions, we include links to relevant sources, other resources, and anything like that. So, all right, let's get started.
Okay, so welcome back to the second part of our interview with Josh, Meagan, and John, organizers and former employees at No Evil Foods. We had a great conversation last week and all had an emotional experience together at the end of it. We wanted to give some space and time to process that. And we are so gracious for our guests coming back and even elaborating on what happened last week. What happened at the time of them organizing the union at No Evil Foods and how that's still affecting them today.
And given the UFCW's already bad history of sexual harassment at high levels, as well as how the national UFCW ignored the complaints of women for years, I would be very concerned that the union would take your harassment complaints as seriously as we would.
So I just kind of want to touch on what happened. As we were talking about the way that they exploited everybody's fears, whether that was through, sexual assault or harassment, whether it was through, people's former incarceration and all of that, these meetings really played up on fears of that. And as we were discussing that, I kind of went into how one of the owners, Sadrah, pretty much framed it like, sexual harassers would run rampant in the workplace and asked me directly if I thought that Harvey Weinstein was absolved of his crime and just really, really awful things like that. And as we started getting into a different subject, I started to panic. My heart was racing. I was hyperventilating. I was walking around on my porch, just like shaking my hands, kind of stimming, I think is the right the word for that. But I just went into a full panic attack. And of course, John and Josh were holding it together and like continuing the conversation while John is trying to comfort me amidst this panic. And it really set me off. So I'm really glad that we were able to reschedule. And I'm glad that you had us back to talk about this, because this is what happens when a company tries to bust a union. They will send you into that panic. That's the idea, to make you look unstable, to make you look not okay. And I just really appreciate you guys having us back.
No, absolutely. Thank you guys for coming back. I can't even imagine what that experience is like, because, obviously it didn't stop at the union bust. It's something that still affects people much, much later, sometimes forever. So I'm so grateful for y'all. And I'm so sorry that this is even a thing. Don't stop us anytime. Let us know. We want to be in solidarity with that experience with you.
I appreciate that so much, and I definitely will, but I'm ready for this, and I'm happy to be here talking about it.
Awesome.
Nice, awesome. So last time I think we stopped before we really could get into any talk about the hazard pay that y'all were pushing for. Before that, we were talking a little bit about COVID and how it affected the treatment of employees, and like how the workplace actually handled the pandemic. I know John was saying it was not handled very well at all, and that was wanting to just kind of ask if that initial union vote was successful. Do you think going into the pandemic, the treatment of employees during that time would have been better, or what kind of difference do you think that would have made?
I wonder about that sometimes personally, because the thing about like a union drive is the actual vote is the first half of the battle. The second half is get the negotiation table. So I'm wondering how No Evil would have tried to manipulate the situation with negotiations, you know?
So if they hadn't actually stalled out the bargaining, I feel like what they probably, best case scenario, wouldn't have done is roll out that 24-hour decision where they gave people 3 options. And I feel like we would have had a little bit more say in their response. I mean, honestly, what led up to that 24-hour decision by itself was them not listening to the fears that people had. I mean, we were telling them over and over and over again that we were afraid to be there. And I had the plant manager at the time tell me that that was the safest place we could be.
Yeah.
Yeah. And no, it's not. And
No, it's not.
She was actually arguing with me about the way that it was transmitted at the time. And I was like, okay, we are in a confined space. Like this could be Outbreak City in like 3 seconds is if one person comes in here and has it. And, you know, like we were just afraid, and they probably, you know, like this is best case scenario, but they would have taken our concerns more seriously. And I really don't think they would have rolled out that 24-hour decision.
Yeah.
I think like the cleaners that they're saying, well, we got all these disinfectants and cleaners, and you could go and read the label. Like one was a surface cleaner that was effective against, like, that specifically was explicitly said will combat coronaviruses. Just one cleaner in their entire, you know, and there's already research coming out that said like the virus has a capacity to like live in the air for up to 2.5 hours. Like I got like serious, like the plant manager, I got serious like suck it up and don't be a sissy kind of vibes off of him.
Whoa.
When all of this kind of kicked off right before the 24-hour decision thing happened, John and I actually approached the plant manager. Her name was Becky at the time. She doesn't work there anymore, but we approached her and we were like, hey, we're scared. Like, we want to take all the paid time off that we have just until, you know, we know more, because more updates were coming out about COVID-19 every day right at the start of it. So we just kind of wanted to take the week and see what was going on and whether we felt it was safe to go in there. And we actually have this recorded, but she ended up telling us that work is the safest place that we can be. And she also told us, she implied that we were living in our own reality by suggesting, no bullshit. Yeah, no, I'm just saying, like, no bullshit. She suggested and implied that John and I were living in our own reality by taking the initial reports of it being transmitted through aerosol droplets. Yeah. She said that it wasn't true and that, you know, everybody has their own reality. So that's pretty much how it was handled. Yeah.
Oh my God.
Insane.
I did not know. I don't know if you told me this conversation, but I definitely forgot it if you did.
Yeah, no, it was insane. I can send all of you the audio later. Like, we have it recorded. It was terrible.
She was saying this is the safest place for you to be during COVID is at your workplace. And we know that this is like a warehouse, sort of like like assembly line or factory setting. Like, what can you describe kind of the work area that she's referring to when she says this is the safest place for you?
Like, you walk through the doors and like you're in the building, and to basically get into the production facility, you had to go through these tiny, what were they, like the size of a closet dining rooms, to like put on like a coat and, you know, beard and a hairnet and all that stuff and gloves. And then when you're actually in the production area, depending on where you were at the time, I just want to emphasize that I'm speaking to how it was. I know a lot
you should, because that's when this happened.
There.
Yeah, that's fine.
So at the time when you were on a machine, you were standing next to people, and when you were on a conveyor belt, you're standing next to people, and when you're like you're always standing next to people. No matter where you are, you're next to somebody. And it's just impossible to consistently social distance while you're there.
Like the person they had designed the whole floor initially, like again, like I don't know how it looks now, probably completely different, but the person who designed the facility initially had no experience designing these sort of spaces.
Oh no.
So like, you know, it was basically like you had these two closets on the side that you entered into, and then it was like basically one big room that was divided in two. So like, you know, like two garages put up, large like mechanic garages put up together with like a single dividing wall. And there was no real thought put into like how the place was laid out and how they were going to scale up their industrial equipment. And like, you know, there'd be no way to work these machines trying to distance. There would be no way to pack the food and distance. The idea of distancing there would be impossible. And like, you know, they didn't even really provide proper like respirators or N95 or anything like that. They didn't even attempt. They're just like, oh, we got these paper masks. Suck it up.
Oh, wow. Okay, so did she clarify at all when she said this is the safest place for you to be? Did she explain why or in what way that could even remotely almost be true?
She said that she feels less safe in her car. She said that she worries more about the germs in her car than about the germs at the workplace. This was all her opinion. And she was presenting it to us as if some kind of scientific fact. Okay. Right? That was my first thought. I'm like, oh, really? Because I feel a hell of a lot safer in my car.
I also want to throw in something too. There was a lot of emphasis on the fact that we had to stay open. We like when they couldn't afford to shut down, and number two, they were they passed out these letters that said like the Department of Homeland Security issued a mandate that we are required to stay open because we're an essential sector of the what was the food chain or something like that?
Supply chain.
And it's like, dude, like, yeah. And I'm saying this, like, let me emphasize, I'm saying this as a vegan. They make fucking $8 sausages. That is not something that people absolutely need to buy. It's just not.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. It was,
and it was just mind blowing. Like you're risking people's lives to come in here because you quote unquote can't afford to shut down, even though you have these multi-million-dollar investors. There's so many things wrong with it. I don't even know where to start.
Yeah, so I guess they got automatically grouped into this essential worker category for being like a food production site. Is that kind of how that works?
Yeah. So, and they were handing out that certification to pretty much any and all businesses. Like the whole like process to be labeled an essential business was completely like just a rubber stamp. I mean, it's boutique vegan food. Like, I mean, it would have been understandable if they'd shut down for like a week or two to figure out how to safely handle this situation. They could have been a lot more thoughtful, and they could have like, you know, maybe consulted like actual like experts on the subject instead of just saying like, oh yeah, we cleaned this place all kinds, and like the cleaners, like, we're not idiots, we can read, and like none of the cleaners that we were using on that floor were rated to do the sort of thing that you would need to do to like for a coronavirus. There weren't even air filters in there. I mean, for crying out loud, one of their air filters, no meme, was like cheesecloth.
So pretty thick.
Yeah.
Lots of holes, lots of not filtering going on there.
If we want to talk about the filtering, like, I know they're not going to know what the mix room is specifically, but I mean, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's where you mix all the dry ingredients, but there were air filters in there, like little like plug-in ones, and they were always caked with fucking shit and dust. And so that was like a normal day. And now with coronavirus, it's like, no, there was no proper filtration with, especially in terms of like COVID and how that would affect everybody. Absolutely not.
And how do you handle and how do you filter and how do you even kill a disease that you don't know anything about? It's been out for like what, a month at the time?
Yeah.
In the US.
In the US, like they and then they say that this is the safest place that we can be. Like, you just don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
That's just
there's so much ambiguity about it.
Yeah, and I mean, and what really boggles me is how they could shut down for 1 or 2 weeks and figure out how to like safely protect their workers and move forward. And like in the end, that would make them even more productive, right? Like if they don't have like to lose workers and have this worker turnover, like their goal is to make more product. They could do that more easily if they took a break to take care of everyone. So it's really mind-boggling, this whole capital mindset that we have in this country of, stay open, take the certificate, no matter what happens, businesses come first. And it's just, in the end, it would be better for them if they weren't like that, right?
I feel like it benefited them in a way to come out with that 24-hour decision and give all of the people right after the union vote a chance to take it out and get rid of some of the organizers and get rid of some of the people who were there for the union vote, and do it in a way where it was like, well, it's your choice. If you want to leave, you can. If you want to stay, you can. And so they lost, what was it, a third of the workforce because of that?
Yeah.
It also disqualified people from unemployment.
Yeah.
People had to fight to get unemployment because technically they took a severance or they just quit. But technically you're quitting. What they did was essentially make sure that nobody could get unemployment after leaving without a fight. I think that was the real intention behind it.
They didn't fight me. There was no fight.
Well, maybe they left like the possibility there if they did want to take that route, I guess.
I mean, I was kind of like you want to fight kind of mode.
Yeah, you're kind of like a problem that they just wanted to sweep under the rug problem.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
But, y'all just changed my mind, because actually, you're right. It is more beneficial for them to not take those few weeks and figure out how to protect you guys. Because like you said, they benefited from that 24-hour notice and getting rid of any of the people who had a problem, right? And so they would have kept not... in general, people who had less dissent, maybe. And then back then, remember that everyone still had this mindset that there's an endless supply of workers. And if you don't like it, we'll get rid of you and there'll be someone else willing to take your place. Now I'm loving to see that it's not quite that way for a lot of like fast food restaurants right now and other places. Which is just awesome.
It's like, whoa, people don't want to work for starvation wages. Weird.
Mm-hmm.
So funny anecdote, and I don't want to take up too much time saying this, but it was really funny because right now I work at a grocery store. So this happened the other day, actually. I was bagging this lady's groceries, and she made a comment that was like, oh, you guys are so understaffed because nobody wants to work anymore, ha ha ha, and said it in this like jovial tone. And I just want people to know that the only way to respond to that, if a customer says that to you, is to cheerfully encourage them to apply at your job. The look of horror on their face, the look of horror on this woman's face was priceless. Like, she was uncomfortable the rest of the interaction, and you can't get in trouble because you're just being friendly. Hey, come work with us. Like, no, they don't want to do that. The people who say that shit don't actually want to work the job that you're working.
Of course not. No, that's the whole point.
Yeah, that's awesome.
That's awesome. I love that. Okay, so let's talk hazard pay. What is it and why do people deserve it?
Well, it's basically, I mean, this is just my perspective. John and Meagan were there. They were in it to win it for this one. But like, it's pretty much the least you could do for your employees that are risking their safety in an extremely precarious time. The backslapping that some people were doing about it, but like what No Evil Food was just offensive. I'll let them continue though.
Yeah. Well, I mean, why do people deserve it? Because they're coming in every day to make $8 vegan sausages, and they're doing it in the middle of a pandemic. I mean, in the case of No Evil Food specifically, I mean, they're risking their lives to come in every day. It's a risk to come in to that enclosed area every single day to make that product. Or, I mean, in general, it's a risk to go into any customer-facing business or pretty much any workforce at like, it's unless you're working from home, like you're pretty much working around people, and there is a hazard involved with that. And it was just so offensive the way that they dangled it in front of our faces and said, well, you can get hazard pay, but you have to qualify for it. And I don't know if you wanted to talk about the specific 24-hour decision more in detail, but
I remember reading, if you want hazard pay, cool, you can have it if the virus doesn't kill you in the next 90 days of work and you can't miss one day for anything, right? That's
Yeah.
awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Fucking
that was
insulting.
probably one of the most surrealist experiences of my life.
I
That whole
cannot believe that was literally a condition.
Yeah, that's like what the fuck?
That's
fucking
crazy.
audacity. Like,
well, and I kind of hammed it up a little bit in that situation. Like I really made like my email replies were like very much like, oh, I'm really worried about things going down. Me and my spouse we're getting ready for the end times, brother.
Brother.
You know, just to go like, oh, we really don't want this guy back, and maybe we don't want to dispute this dude's unemployment.
Hey, I like that. That's a good strat. So just so I got this straight, y'all were asking for hazard pay. They said probably something along the lines of, well, we can't afford that. We're a new company. We're still a small business, blah, 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 blah. We can't afford hazard pay. Is that like a general argument when hazard pay is asked for by employers and that they like it's something that we can't afford right now?
Well, let me kind of backtrack a little bit. So the way it kind of went down was we were all worried about coming in every day. And the way we approached it was we just circulated a petition and said, look, like, do you like the way that thing, like, do you like this policy where if you're a minute late to work, you automatically disqualify yourself from hazard pay? Or do you think that coming in every day, you kind of just earn, like, you just earn it by being here? And the amount of people who signed that damn petition and the amount of people who got on board with it, even if they weren't like telling other people about it or being like vocally supportive, they still signed it. And people knew, even people who had voted against the union like a month before, there was a very tangible solidarity in that workforce that I hadn't seen probably since I had started there, with that petition and with the organizing that took place around COVID. And I feel like that was something that legitimately scared them. And they saw that, and they were starting to realize that even if we didn't get the UFCW in there, we could still have a damn union and we could still organize. And I think that scared the shit out of them.
Yeah.
And it should.
Yeah.
My biggest lesson from like hearing about this secondhand was like, this was an instance where there was an instance of like, hey, if we collectively come together, we can actually have a change and a voice here. You know, that was something that we weren't able to necessarily illustrate with the union drive because it was all very intangible things. We couldn't just, you know, what John and Meg were able to do though, they were able to go like, here's what happens when we speak as one.
Yeah. And in a lot of ways, I almost feel like if the union vote had been in March, maybe we would have actually won, because I mean, it's there's so many variables, like who knows, but I mean, we would have had something to rally around unless they just immediately handed out hazard pay. But like, that's what I mean. Like, there's so many unknowns about it.
Yeah. And, you know, you always probably like assume that humans have empathy and like a human nature that is good. And then, they surprise you at every turn.
Understand.
It's a common mistake.
Incredibly evil. Yeah. A common mistake.
You think they'd be like, oh, well, our workers are willing to keep coming to work during a pandemic. Maybe that's an important
Literally
thing that we
risking
should like
your life
be rewarding people extra for
to make a little bit of money and a whole lot of profit for your bosses.
Yeah.
Yes. That's incredible.
So I think like, okay, so when we had the biggest support, when we had a lot of ones, it was December when they were saying, oh yeah, no, you guys got to come in Christmas Eve. And everybody was just big mad about that. And, you know, unfortunately though, that's in the middle of the holidays. And like, you know, I don't know if we didn't capitalize on that enough, or if like, you know, maybe like people had enough time to stew in it. I think if we were able to get that vote in mid-January, we definitely could have had it.
Yeah, I agree. It was that time where between like what you're talking about with the holidays and working on Christmas Eve and all of that, and February, like the union vote either had to have been in January or like in March.
I mean, like that's something like I've been like just ruminating over and like reading a lot of stuff from union organizers, and the common thread there is like the way we didn't communicate enough of how much of a slog it was going to be. We didn't necessarily prepare ourselves for just how dragged out it could possibly get. And like I think part of it was like all the people who were threes and not ones, but like they were like solid undecided, were like going like, well, what are we going to do? Nothing's happening. Why should I believe you?
I agree with what you're saying entirely. Like if the vote had been either in December or if it had been in March, or not December, maybe like you said, January or March. But the fact that they had all of that time to throw up all those posters, vote no, and to pull people into these one-on-ones and scare them with whatever the hell they said to them, and to hold all of these captive audience meetings and scare the shit out of everybody. I feel like that's really what turned the tables on us.
So something that I've learned from you guys then is that the timing of proposing a union to workers can be very much crucial.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think like, you know, if
freaking out. Hold on, you guys. Trev?
Oh yeah.
No, it's good actually. I just got it like for some reason it was saying I was running out of time and I knew that and I was about to be like, okay, let's get off and get back on. But I just got a little update from Zoom, that like a notification that says we're gonna let you have like the 40-minute time limit is not applicable to this meeting. Like
why?
You can have, I don't know why. It says a gift from Zoom.
Nope.
It says
no.
They're observing this meeting to learn the techniques of the evil union
they say,
organizers.
keep it coming. I'm using all this in the lawsuit against Josh's NDA. Fuck. Okay, so,
right.
So you have a time limit then?
I don't see. Yeah, the 40 minutes that was on the top of the screen disappeared. So I think we're good.
Well, okay. Sorry to interrupt. I saw Trevor like flailing his arms and like screaming at the screen. I was like, oh my God, okay, have a break. But I guess we didn't need to do that. Okay. Well, okay. In that case, I have a question about forming a union, since that's what we're talking about. Do workers have a choice of union firms to represent them? And if so, what is the variety like? And do you even call them union firms?
So I've never used the term union firm, but that's essentially what it is. You have your bigger unions, and like, I'll remind you again, I am not an expert. This is just what I've learned, like between the union drive and Google and talking to the union organizers at the UFCW, but you do have different options. I mean, you can go for a bigger union like the UFCW. They're, I think, the 6th largest union in the country. And then there's also the model of like the IWW, the Industrial Workers of the World, where you don't even necessarily need NLRB recognition, because you can do the same kind of thing where we put the petition together and do all of that. Like, the main goal is coming together as workers, because whether you have a big union behind you or a small one, or if it's just the workers, you know, as long as you have that solidarity between the workers and you can come together on those common issues, that's what's going to help you regardless of what union you're with, or even if you have one. And I think that's a really important distinction to make too, because, you know, after the union drive failed, we were like, okay, what do we do now? And so you keep going. You need to keep trying to organize the employees there. And so.
Yeah. And like, you know, like, I can understand some of the confusion around it. So like, you know, you got to think of it like, okay, so like something like the Teamsters, I would say it'd be like if you rolled a Horde character on the white main server in World of Warcraft Classic. You know, it's a big server, lots of people, but it's totally possible you become another face in the crowd. But if you say like you did a server transfer to Deviant Delight, well, there it's a smaller server and there's a lot more specialist boutique kind of guilds that you can work with and will be more cognizant of your needs. And that's kind of the difference between like the large unions, I was about to call them a guild, the large unions like the Teamsters, and something smaller like the UFCW.
Okay. And then my next question then would be, after you have a union, a contract's been made, and that contract ends in a few years, let's say, do the workers then have a choice to switch unions? Like, let's say they were unsatisfied in any way with the one that represented them for that contract period.
So like, as far as I understand it, to switch a union would require a whole new vote. So you'd have to have the whole process over again. I don't know if I would assume that you'd have to like leave the union as employees and then have a whole new vote, which leaves you to a very vulnerable position for management to take advantage of that. So I mean, like,
it's kind of risky.
Yeah. I think if you were like a small place, like, because I mean, like, there's a lady from the NLRB who like one of the management had gone like, oh, I bet this is the smallest place you've gone to, and her reply to him was like, nah, I was at a place that was unionizing last week and there was only 14 employees.
Yeah, hell yeah.
So like, if it's like a small place like that, I mean, like, if you were like in a plant with like 1,500 workers, that's a very risky endeavor. But like, I think if you were like a smaller place, you could be a little bit more nimble. If like, at least if you were able with a union that gave tangible enough benefits to see people know that it's worth it.
Yeah, I guess I was trying to think like what protections, because last time we had talked about how union firms or union like the admin sometimes make a lot of money. And so I was kind of like seeing them in like a business kind of light, and then thinking, well, what kind of protections do workers have against unions that represent them? And you would, ideally they would be on your side, but as we know how business goes, sometimes it doesn't work out that way. And so I guess, like you're saying, it would just be up to the workers maybe after a contract period with a union. If they were happy with having a union, but maybe not everything about the firm, they could revote to have another, but it is risky. So I guess that's just a hard place.
So I actually asked this to the organizers that we were in contact with at the UFCW that were trying to help us organize this union, because that was a main talking point of Mike and Sadrah at No Evil. The union doesn't have to represent you. They don't have to do this. They don't have to do that. What if you're unhappy? Blah, blah, blah. So I asked them about this, and I was like, well, what if we're unhappy with the representation that we're getting? And what they told me was that, this is literally from the UFCW. This is what the organizer told me, that the union is not us. The union is the workers. So if the workers are unhappy, they can either petition for things through the union, they can talk to their shop steward, there are multiple avenues that you can go through if you're unhappy with your union representation. And that this isn't me advocating specifically for bigger unions. I actually like the smaller model better in my own personal opinion. But at the same time, your boss is lying to you if they're saying like, oh, you won't be able to change this, you won't be able to change that, you could be stuck in this. No, that's not how it works. If the workers come together and they decide that something isn't working to their benefit, there are avenues that they can take to change that. And it's not something that you should use to fear unionization. You can get around that.
Yeah. And like, and every union handles their structure a little bit different. Like, I know on the shop level, it's pretty standard procedure for like, if your representation at work is not good or you're dissatisfied with them, I think you can pretty much call for a snap vote of no confidence. And I'm pretty sure most unions they're democratic by nature. And so I was reading some unions, they do have like conventions every year, every 2 years, where each region elects representatives to represent them at like the kind of committee, like convention situations.
Okay.
One of the other things too, and this is just something I want to throw out there, is that like this will be used kind of as a talking point against unions, but like that the union doesn't have to listen to you, but your manager sure as hell doesn't have to listen to you either.
Okay.
And the union is actually there to represent you. And your manager is there to actually just make a fucking profit. The union is there to represent you. The manager is there, or the bosses are there to basically represent the investors and the bottom line.
Yeah.
Like you're saying, there are mechanisms within a union that are, that are supposed to be democratic, that like people do have a say and like in those terms and in those things. Like, so like, but like obviously in your workplace, you have no such avenue to like have your concerns addressed at all by your employer.
Well, that's not entirely true. I mean, we had a suggestion box.
Yeah.
See how well it worked out for
Hell
you
yeah.
guys?
And listen, there are like despite everything that happened, I mean, they're still my friends. Like I hang out with them all the time, and they totally like read every single suggestion I ever put in that box.
Tell me, was there a time where that box was just overflowing and like graffitied and like just totally decimated
No,
this process?
no,
Or really?
that would require a certain level of people being that emotionally invested. I mean, like, you know, the average American worker, they're beat. We're all beat. We're
Yeah.
tired. You know, we live in an extreme level of financial precarity, and you know, most people just want to, like, you know, if you're in your early 20s, you're just trying to, like, you know, punch in, punch out, and then go home and get some good mids. And you know, if you're like older and you got a family, like, you're kind of hanging on to what you have as much as possible. So, like, you know,
Yeah.
very much the whole "don't rock the boat," you know, I mean, don't rock the boat. I don't know where that came from, but like, you know,
Don't rock
it's
the
just this, you know, you don't, and that was kind of one of their talking points, was like, look at how much we're paying you.
Mm.
Yeah, it's like their talking point is basically like, look how much less you could get paid. Like, basically,
Right.
They're like,
Oh my God. Yeah, that's what it was. It's crazy.
insane. That like,
Although-
you're exactly right though. It's like people don't, you know, have the time or like the means to usually even be in a position where they can care about that or even think it's possible to organize for other conditions, because they're just so worried about, you know, losing the job that they have and maybe
And
even
they're
having to get a worse one
exhausted.
or not having one.
While as far as I know, the comment box never got vandalized. Some of their signs around COVID did get vandalized, and one of them was a sign. There were a couple signs they had put up that basically said something to the effect of "Make sure you're washing your hands," and somebody had crossed that out and said, just crossed out the whole thing and said, "Just send us home in the middle of an unprecedented global pandemic, you ghouls." And
Yes.
But I mean, did they ever use, like, you're just talking about the suggestion box? I know, like, you know, you're saying it ironically, like that's like a process for them actually meeting any concerns that employees have. But like, did they ever like point to that and be like,
Absolutely.
we have a suggestion box.
We have a mechanism
Like,
for
yeah,
your concerns.
Like, you don't need a union. You can just put your
That is a
suggestions in
good
the box.
poster. That would be
And
great.
you could really monitor the relationship between like management and the workers by the distance that was growing, like physical distance. So like when I started working there, all the admin offices were like right next to the floor, and like, you know, you could actually like walk by like Mike and Sadrah's office every day. But then like as they started taking more space in that you know, spot, and like building offices that were in the back, what would end up happening was you wouldn't see them more and more distant they would become. And that was like, it became very apparent when around Thanksgiving, they were like, okay, you got Thanksgiving off, but you got to come on Friday. So we're all going in there Friday, and we just, you know, lights are out in all the offices. And I'm kind of like, wow, yeah, this is leadership we're seeing, everybody.
Out of sight, out of mind. You don't see me.
Yeah, I'm like, you know, they don't care. They all get salaried pay.
They're getting
Yeah.
paid to not be there, actually.
one of the things that they did that in retrospect, it was very, very clever, and kind of on the page of whether or not they're listening to us or them pretending to listen to us. And this is one of those tactics that you wouldn't know because it's so veiled. Like, you would never know that this is something that can be used for a dual purpose. But they basically broke us down, and this was like shortly before the union vote, but just within like that window, so it was still legal for them to do something like this. And they broke us down into like these little groups. They were like rotating groups. So you would have like, I don't know, 5 people in a group, and you'd have one manager in that group. And then you would go over any grievances you had. Some of us called them bitching sessions. Like, we would just complain and tell them like, oh, I mean, we're worried about this or we're concerned about this. And like I said, this is pre-COVID, this is even pre-election. And And then so like that session with that group that you were in would last for maybe, I don't know, 5 or 10 minutes. And then you would go to a completely new group with a completely different new a different leader, like a different manager, and then you would have like a different group of people in that next meeting, and you would basically talk about